Well, I guess it's time to get back to the basics, huh? No? Okay, well, I guess basically when we start. No? Well, uh. just cut to the thing. Be talking about this a little bit more over the next two videos as we discuss the overhaul that happened behind the scenes when Voyager went from Season 2 to Season 3. I do want to mention this once here, even though I'll probably mention it later. It is worth noting that every Star Trek series, with the exception of the original series, debatably, has undergone this exact same transformation. Star Trek Season 3, Star Trek Next Generation Season 3, a lot of people were changed behind the scenes, and the show was generally considered to be starting to get good. Not that I'm saying it wasn't good before. I'm just saying when most people think really good TNG and the stuff that was really popular, it was Season 3 and onwards. Deep Space Nine, same thing. Starting with the Jem'Hadar and the Search, to be specific. And then we move on to Voyager, which, is basically what's going to be happening here. Most people consider Season 3 or Season 4 to be the best season. It kind of varies based on the opinion. I'm actually torn. I'm not sure which one I'd pick as the best. It's definitely one of the two. But either way, Season 1 and Season 2 of Voyager were, as I've discussed before, kind of tolerable. And then we got to Season 3 where I started actually really digging the show. And it's this point where hopefully I'll start being a little more positive about the episodes. At least until we get to Q in the Gray. But anyways, before we get into that mess, let's talk about this episode. Oh, by the way, it happened in Enterprise, too. The Xindi, that whole thing. Yeah. Let's go ahead and talk about the teaser at the beginning of this one. It's actually a really good one, all things considered. It's very strong on continuity, and one of the things we see right off the bat is it's going to involve two guest stars. Now, I know I keep banging on about things like this that are kind of antiquated as far as television goes today, but back in the day, having two guest stars at the same time on a show was actually kind of rare, and was the kind of thing you had to very specifically budget for, especially episodes like this, which are going to involve a lot of effects thing. Basics in general was actually a very expensive two-parter to do, between the landing sequence of the Voyager, the battle sequences, plural, and one shot which actually took surprisingly large amount of time and money, which was the Doctor's shot when he was teleported, holographically projected out into space. All of that actually took a fairly large amount of time and money, and then you factor in that they had guest stars in this episode. And overall, I think that's one of the reasons why Basics and Voyager really had as good of a chance as it did, because they really wanted to start Season 3 with their right foot forward. At least that's the impression I got. I'll talk a little bit more about what happened with the behind-the-scenes stuff later, and Michael Piller in specific. I do want to comment on one thing, though. The name of this episode is a deliberate reference to two concepts. One is the obvious, getting down to the basics with the crew, which is, what primarily, that's basically what actually happens in Episode 2. But here in Episode 1, it's still, obviously connected. The idea that they're going to have to live without all of their Star Trek technology. And as we've seen, these people don't even know what a splint is, so they're probably screwed. But the other thing was that Piller insisted that Star Trek get back to its roots, get back to its basics, and forgive me for misquoting, but it is something paraphrased, we need to get back to Gene Roddenberry's vision. That quote's actually kind of important considering how generally dissatisfied Piller was with the direction Voyager took immediately after this, because he believed that the direction the show was going was already on course and didn't really need to be changed, as is what actually happened. But again, I'll talk about that more later. Let's talk about the actual episode. Let's talk about Suitor. Oh, by the way, the two guest stars in this episode are Seska and Suitor. Probably my two favorite guest stars in the history of the show, not counting John Delancey, because that's just a gimme. And also the fact that both of them not only put in great performances, but are interesting characters regardless. Suitor especially here, Brad Dourif spoke about how much effort he put into portraying what he called a third personality for his character, because he wasn't the the killer, the guy who couldn't control himself, and he wasn't the man who was on the mind meld now and completely logical and calculating and things. Now he described this personality as childlike, motivated by fear, because he's trying so hard to hold on to his new life and to his new mental discipline to maintain his control without the effects of the mind meld, because those have since worn off. And so he is terrified of losing control at any moment. I'll be talking about a particular scene about that later, but he does a really good job of that. So we start with the teaser with him. Then we immediately cut to a teaser where we hear about Seska and how she has given birth to Chakotay's child. And oh my god, they found out it wasn't... Kulla found out it wasn't her child, and everything's terrible. Oh my god, please help. Good teaser. Really gets the attention, and again, shows the kind of emphasis they were putting on these episodes. Now, when we come out of the teaser, we have a discussion between Janeway and Chakotay. I mentioned back in Resolutions the chemistry these two actors had. This, and ironically another two-parter, Scorpion, will both demonstrate that chemistry very well, because honestly the two actors do really well together. This scene's a good example of that. Chakotay is enraged and furious, but Janeway is pretty much cutting straight to the heart of the issue. She thinks, and indeed knows, that she and the crew, especially after the events that happened back in episode I don't remember the name of, it was the one where Chakotay went off by himself to deal with the Seska situation. She knows and feels that she and the crew will actually assist Chakotay if they believe that's the correct course. The only question is they need to determine if that's the correct course or not. Chakotay then goes to get advice from his father. Now, I actually really like that scene. I'll go and be honest with you. I don't know if you can see here. It's one of those top notes there, the one that's kind of crossed off. I crossed that off because I originally decided that discussing that would open up a tangle of worms, and I didn't want to. But I have to be honest with both myself and my audience in that that is basically a cowardly opinion to not do so in this case. And so I'm just going to go ahead and be honest and say that their discussion of the unwanted, unplanned children that were born as a result of the misuse and abuse of women during the older times of American Indians and by a result of everybody. And just the whole discussion about that was actually surprisingly well handled, I think. Because it wasn't about whether or not it wasn't about the act itself, which is good. It wasn't about whether or not it was wrong or not, which is good. It was about what do you do afterwards. And I kind of like that because A, it's a more mature outlook on the concept itself. The idea of what do we do now? How do we deal with this? How do we function? What do we do to process this problem, this difficulty that has now arisen? And the overall message was very simple. Those children were completely innocent of any wrongdoing. Whether they were planned or not, whether they were intentional or not, regardless of what the source of that birth was untouched by the crime that perpetrated it. And of course, dealing with that in another way didn't really exist back then. So the options were get rid of the child or keep the child, basically, assuming the child survived birth, and of course assuming the woman survived childbirth. And the general consensus here that Papa Chakotay, I can't even remember his name, gives him is very simple. That child deserves your love just as much as any child of yours would, because he is your child, regardless of the source of the problem. And I actually kind of like that, and I like their approach on it. Because one of the other funny things is Chakotay literally tried to start talking about the situation, because it's complicated in his case. I mean, this is the future, so naturally it was more like his DNA was extracted from his neck with a frickin' bone syringe, and used to artificially inseminate her for some friggin' reason. Blah 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 blah. And as a result, now that child is being used as a lure to what is probably a trap. All those complications were literally flung out the window because Chakotay tried to explain those to him and failed because his father's... And he has a great line. He says, Chakotay says, it's not that simple, it's not about the love or something like that. And the father says, no, it has to start there. It has to start with whether or not you love that child. And Chakotay actually abandons all the other complications because once he realizes that truth, that's enough for him. Now let's be blunt. In terms of tactical correctness, no, going after the child was not the correct thing. But we'll talk about that more in a little bit. I just wanted to compliment the scene for doing a surprisingly adult look on the subject. Oh god, it's my next note right there. Okay, before we get into everything else, because everything else is basically all about the A plot. There's a very tiny B plot, and it's basically about Suitor. It only actually has a grand total of 3 scenes in the whole episode to it. The first was in the teaser, I already mentioned that. Okay, so Suitor wants to start using his knowledge of horticulture, basically, in order to add to the productivity and growth and capabilities of the hydroponics bay, or aeroponics bay, excuse me. Or is it hydroponics? You know, I don't remember. The ponics bay. And the idea there being that he wants to contribute to something to the crew, but there's also an undercurrent. Again, even only 3 scenes, Brad Dourif does a wonderful level of subtlety to his performance. It's obvious that he is basically trying so hard. He is shoving all of his energy, all of his mindset, all of his focus, of which he has quite a bit, I might add, and that's demonstrated before and talked about before, into this new thing. Because when he is so focused on A over here, he can't think about killing. He can't think about those violent urges that have so destroyed his life for his entire life. And so he is flinging himself full tilt into this with all the dangers that implies. Because then we have a scene where Janeway hesitates about giving him this permission. That scene is horrifyingly just terrible in its subtlety and brutality, because Suitor knows at the end of that scene he has blown it. He had one chance, and he lost it because he was so invested in this project, both emotionally and kind of literally, that he lost control, if only for a few seconds. Didn't actually attack her, didn't have to, didn't yell insults. He just got angry, and that's all it took. And he lost his chance, and he knew it. That scene is a scene that I always tend to take Suitor's side on. Maybe that's because I have more sympathy for Suitor, especially given his condition. Maybe it's the fact that I understand his perspective better. But when you really analyze that scene, both characters have very defined... It's easy to see both their viewpoints. Janeway is someone who sees someone who is a killer, who is a violent, dangerous criminal who has done horrible things, and hasn't really done anything to show that he is accommodated to, or rather... rehabilitated, that's a better word, himself, other than the verdict of Tuvok, which she obviously values, but that value has only gotten her in the door. So she wants to talk to him, and then she wants to discuss their options with a few other people and think about it. Now, at that moment, that is completely reasonable. But Suitor, he's only thinking about how much he wants to push forward with this. After all, if they have to pause... You know, he doesn't want to pause. He wants to keep going. He wants to keep running on this treadmill. He wants to keep pushing as much and hard as he can. So from his perspective, Janeway is just stonewalling for no reason. So he pushes. And she pushes back because she wants to think about it. She's not ready to allow access to a dangerous individual, anything. And she's also fully aware of the fact that there are other complications here, especially as the captain of a starship. And so he pushes back again. And that's when he loses control, he loses his temper, and he gets angry. And at that point, Janeway has basically made her decision, hasn't she? Because at that point, she has decided no. Because of that fact. It's such a horrible scene. I feel so bad for Suitor for that. So, one of the things I find funny about Voyager is, with very few exceptions, their battle scenes suck, okay? I have actually gone back and done a few analyses rather than relying on vague memories, and I've actually come up with a reason. I believe I've mentioned this before, but I've come up with a reason for why it is Voyager's battle scenes tend to suck in comparison to Deep Space Nine's, which are actually really, really good, and even TNG's, which could be good depending on the circumstances. It comes down to directing, actually. See, when you're an actor and you have to act for about 10 seconds at a time, you can throw yourself into those 10 seconds with relative ease. But what most people tend to forget is while we're watching that show with all the music and the action and the everything shaking, the occasional cutaways to the thing, the actual actors on the set are acting on a set with a bunch of cameras with nothing happening and no music. And no matter how good of an actor you are, you can only maintain that energy for a certain period of time before it reaches the point where you just kind of lose some of the energy and the vibrancy of your performance. And so and this is something that's been well recognized for years and years and years and years. Good directors usually recognize that you want to cut shots of a battle sequence, regardless how it is, pretty quickly so that the actors can really throw themselves into those first few seconds. They can really make themselves believe they are in danger for those few seconds, and then cut, and then, move into position for the next shot, and then throw themselves in again. But when you have those protracted scenes, it gets a lot harder, and it becomes a lot more obvious, especially if you have to do multiple takes, which you almost always have to. And so, I was watching this episode. Most of the early battle sequences were exactly that. They were long shots, they were drawn out, and there was no energy to them at all. It was just, okay. Now, I say all the early shots because there's one exception to that, but I'll get to that later. I just wanted to comment on that here. I also want to comment on the actors. Now, I have a great deal of respect for a lot of the actors in Star Trek, even the ones in Voyager. Even, listen to me. But one of the things that I find interesting is that those actors and me tend to have similar opinions about their own episodes on a lot of occasions. Now, you guys know me, and that I both have a bit of a tactical mind, and I am really fond of war games of all varieties and types. From board to theoretical to written to video game, whether it be real time or turn-based or empire building, it doesn't matter. Something I've always liked. I wouldn't call myself the next Patton or the next, anyone really. But I'd like to think I have a mild, tiny little bit of tactical prowess, like enough to be, say, a cadet, or maybe a boot, or possibly the level of tactical knowledge of a towel, maybe, something along those lines. But every now and again, I'm watching a show I like, and this happens in Star Trek a lot, not just in Voyager. I'll be watching the tactics of what the crew of whatever ship I'm watching are doing, and I'm just rolling my eyes and doing this, because they're pathetic. They're putting on a terrible show. I actually talked about this before in an episode whose name I don't remember. It was actually the last episode where they involved the Kazon and Seska. What was that episode name? Whatever. The actors, many of the actors, at least 4 that I'm aware of, all commented that they felt that the performance of the Starfleet crew in this episode was sad. Was just absolutely pathetic. They weren't on the ball, they weren't quick, they weren't capable of dealing with things, they weren't cautious enough. They were completely outgunned, outmanned, and destroyed because they underperformed. And Kate Mulgrew herself specifically went out of her way to say that she believed that Voyager could have still gone down fighting, they just should have put up a fight. The implication there being the obvious one that they didn't. And I'm inclined to agree. Voyager didn't put up a fight at all. Voyager flung some sand into the eyes of their attackers and then ran into a brick wall. That's basically what they did. It was sad. I could actually deconstruct it for you if you really want me to. Like, for example, they've got these holographic ships that they can present, okay? Why would you not have those going before the battle begins in order to make it so that the enemy is as confused as possible and also going to be as misdirected as possible, especially since you can maintain those holographics for some time? Why would you want to implement it after the ships are already so close to you as to be within swatting distance, which is only going to provide at best a few moments of confusion? Why is it... I'm not going to go over all the things. They just put up a pathetic showing, and we all know why. This is that A to B problem I've talked about a billion times throughout this show, throughout this series. We have A, we need to get to B. A good writer will find a good way through here. A bad writer will say... And so what we have is the Voyager crew getting curb-stomped by... I don't even have an appropriate insult for what the Kazon are. Normally, if this was another show or another series, sci-fi or not, I would say they got curb-stomped by the Kazon, because the Kazon are one of the best examples of a pathetic villain that I've ever seen in fiction. I'll talk about that more a little bit later. There's also one other problem with this whole thing, and that's the fact that most people don't understand what spy mastering really involves. Forgive me for segueing for a bit. This also kind of came up recently with Captain America 2, The Winter Soldier. I'm not saying any spoilers, don't worry. But the real interesting thing about this is a lot of people will say things like, oh, they couldn't possibly be, a spy or a double agent or a triple agent. They've done A, B, and C. Or, I can't imagine that someone who would do this even in private would be a violent. Or I can't imagine that the enemy is playing us if they've given up all these vital secrets. That kind of a thing, right? Most people don't understand that all that matters when it comes to that kind of thing, which I just call spy mastering in general. I'm sure there's a proper term for it. All that really matters is two things: your long-term goal and how important it is. Now let's look at this from the Kazon's perspective. Their long-term goal is Voyager and the use and dissemination of its technology that they can just spread throughout their fleet, which will ensure the dominance of their particular sect over all the Kazon, and their domination of a decent chunk of the quadrant. Now, they will not be able to actually dominate... I shouldn't say the quadrant. The sector is actually probably a better term. A decent domination of the sector. There's no way they're going to be able to dominate the quadrant. There's too many other powers that are way better. I mean, the Voth come to mind immediately, which we haven't even met yet. And, of course, the You-Know-Who, which we'll be seeing next season. But that is a very high-end, very, very important goal, which brings me to point 2. That goal is more important than the lives of a few million Kazon Nistrum, if you know what I mean by that. That, to them, is more valuable than virtually anything. So, all the things that are done, both by the Kazon agent and the Kazon themselves to accomplish this episode, are the kind of things that scream to me, of course they're going to do that, because the prize is worth it. Everything that they do. For example, the guy has to actually endure all those beatings, actually have his hip broken, actually breathe poisonous gas, actually risk dying, because if Voyager hadn't showed up and rescued him, he'd be dead within an hour. Yep. He would definitely do all that because, A, he knows that that goal is that important, and of course the Kazon have that kind of loyalty to their own sect, as we've seen, and B, the goal was that important. You see where I'm going with this? And if there's one thing that Seska knows, it's she knows this concept. The idea of the only thing that is stopping you from doing whatever is necessary to accomplish your goal is how important that goal is. Using her own child, luring Voyager into a trap, ensuring that they can't self-destruct, planting the sleeper agent. I mean, she could have gone way further than this, is all I'm saying, and it would have been fully justifiable. And that's kind of my point. Chakotay is the only one who's really suspicious of anything, and it's just because he's suspicious, basically, and for no other reason. Somebody really should have seen this coming, especially since Seska is already someone who has pulled this off. Seska is already someone who has already done that to the crew before the show began. Was willing to join the Maquis. Helped the Maquis do damage to the Cardassians, because that damage was justifiable based off of what she was going to gain out of it. This already happened, guys. In fact, I could keep going. Everything she did it a second time, too. Now, granted, I'm not sure why Seska... Well, okay, I know why Seska decided to go with the Kazon, but whatever, let's just ignore that whole argument. The point being, she's already did it a second time by willing to accomplish whatever was necessary in order to ally with the Kazon, because in her mind, the goal was worth it. It's a very Cardassian way of thinking, if you'll forgive me for putting it in such terms, even though, it's not limited to Cardassians, obviously. And I just felt like mentioning that, because the crew just are like, through this whole episode. I swear. I already mentioned that. Let's talk about that blood bomb while we're speaking about it. And while we're talking about our sacrificial lamb, who is literally sacrificing himself both in terms of pain and agony, and of course the fact that he knows, walking into this, that he is going to die if he is successful. If he's not successful, he will also die. So one way or another, he's walking into this a dead man. The thing I want to bring up is the blood bomb. I don't know what else to call it. I don't think it ever actually has an official term. I just wanted to bring it up because I've had a few fans talk to me about how ridiculous that is. And I have to admit, it is kind of ridiculous until you think about it. The 2 points of ridiculousness, one obvious and one non, are your blood explodes. That's the obvious one. By the way, when I say explode, let's make this clear. If you haven't seen this episode, I don't mean gush. I mean boom. Explosive, okay? So your blood explodes. That's kind of ridiculous. And the second thing is the fact that the doctor couldn't figure out what the heck was up with it, couldn't determine it, even though that blood bomb is almost assuredly Cardassian in origin. Because there is no way in hell that the Kazon, the Kazon, which again, I don't have another term for pathetic villain, they're as low as it gets, the Kazon, there's no way in hell they were actually capable of coming up with medical technology that would best the doctor. No, I'm sorry. Especially given the doctor had several days to look over this fact. So, again, no. But the Cardassians, well, that I could see. Because, A, it is a very Cardassian kind of technique. It is the kind of thing you would do when you want someone to destroy something quietly, and you want to destroy it at a very specific point. It is the perfect type of infiltration bomb. Because you can specifically damage, you look at a fortress, okay? Lots of walls, lots of defenses. Here's its weak point. Its weak point is way inside the walls, past the guns, past the people. How do you deal with that? You get the bomb in there. I know this is simplifying a lot, but this is very much a Cardassian way of thinking, which again brings me to my point. They probably should have figured this out sooner. Nevertheless, I think it makes perfect sense, because it's very Cardassian thinking, and I could fully believe that even though... well, especially given the level of cooperation, is the way I'm going to phrase that, between the Cardassians and the Federation at the time Voyager launched, which would determine the level of Cardassian knowledge that, the Doctor has, was not enough that the Cardassians would probably be willing to give away such incredible secrets like that, especially since I almost guarantee you that's an Obsidian Order thing. So, totally with that. A lot of people I've also talked to have talked about how stupid the Tom Paris death scene is. That actually doesn't bother me at all. I'm going to explain why. I know this is a weird episode. Just bear with me. The reason it doesn't bother me is because it's not actually portrayed as his death. It would be really easy to portray it as his death in your typical bad TV fashion. Oh my god, Tom Paris has died. Everyone reacts. No. Instead, it's more like, Tom's gone. Huh? Tom, come in, come in. And I don't know about you, but when I saw that scene, I wasn't thinking, oh my god, Tom's dead, or, of course he's not dead. I wasn't thinking either of the things. What I was thinking was, I actually had this mental image of Tom piloting his ship, practically, literally yelling out loud at his comm, I don't have time to respond right now, I'm kind of busy, It wasn't really a suspense moment, because we know Tom Paris isn't dead. That's not the point of that scene. The point of that scene is to put their ace in the hole and put it right over there for what can be retrieved when necessary. The fact that the ship appeared to be destroyed was basically essential for that, because if it wasn't, then the Kazon would have just known and gone after him, and with brute force on their side, probably would have just ended that, and then Tom would have died. So I'm with that. Now, I mentioned earlier the directorial problems with battle scenes. I have to give credit to the final one that happens as well. They really put their all into this. You could tell. You could tell they were really trying. The final battle, where Voyager gets curb stomped, was actually pretty well done. It's actually only 2 scenes. It's like a grand total of a minute of scene time. But that's my point. It's short. It's brief. All the energy is there. All the actors are like, oh my god, this, that, and this happening, and this, and then Janeway says, evacuate the ship, and then it's, Janeway pie, nope, not suicide, I guess that's technically the right word, self-destruct, there we go, they both start with an S, self-destruct is offline, oh, and then the Kazon, of course, board the ship. That whole, it's actually like 50 seconds, but that chunk was really effective, and was probably the first time, I'd say actually the second time, in Voyager that a battle sequence has actually felt tense. So props on that. Speaking of which, even though it is dumb for reasons I'm not going to go into, I do like the fact that the reveal, for lack of a better, with the self-destruct non-functioning was actually really good. It's stupid because... I almost feel like I don't have to... It's like explaining why water is wet. It's stupid because of the fact that, A, they know that they've been attacked in the same spot, non-stop, and it's been causing damage to the same system, non-stop, for days. 2, that they wouldn't know what that system affects. And 3, that they wouldn't do something about it other than just continue to repair it as the enemy destroys it. So the mere fact that that was a reveal to the crew was stupid. But it was a good reveal to us, the viewers, because we didn't know the secondary command processors had anything to do with the self-destruct. But the people who run the ship should have. So I'm going to give that one a pass. You know, it's like a neutral, because it's a good scene. It's just... Now, I also have to comment on something that just makes me laugh every time I watch this episode. The Voyager has landed once. Landing a ship is pretty much a brand new thing, unless you count the Enterprise D landing in the movie. I'm not sure that really qualifies. Twice, actually, if you want to get down to it. But, so, you know, Deanna Troi definitely was an awesome helmsman there. I'm sorry, I'm being mean. Point being, a starship landing was kind of a big deal. That's one of the reasons they made such a thing of it in the 37s. Then they didn't do it again until this episode. I believe, I actually looked this up before, and I believe they do it a grand total of 4 times in the entire series. Here in the 37s, Demon, and another episode I can't remember. I think it's actually 5 times, excuse me. But the point being, it's a rare thing, big deal. Never been done before, so it's new even to Starfleet. Naturally, that's why Kazon, who have never run a starship vessel in their life, can perform this unusual procedure that even Starfleet people aren't fully familiar with, instantly and without issue the very first time they try it. Now, I know what you're going to say. Oh, well, Seska just set up a bunch of, you know, workable programs and for them to practice on Federation piloting skills, to which I say, how does Seska know that much about every single aspect about running a Federation starship by herself? I mean, I'm okay with Seska being competent. In fact, that's one of her highlights as far as her character goes, but that's a little bit too much. Again, it's silly. Whatever. Moving on. Now, God, I'm almost at the end here. My videos are just getting shorter and shorter. Towards the end, pretty much at the end, one of the things I found interesting about this episode, and Kate Mulgrew does the most with this, I think. Kate Mulgrew, Tim Russ, and Robert Beltran all do a really good job of this. One of the things that Starfleet is, I gotta say this way, supposed to be trained in is how to live without technology. Now, I know that sounds weird because, again, the whole, you know, not knowing what a splint is thing, or a suture. But anyways, Star Trek's inconsistent. What do you want from me? But it is often shown that Star Trek, Starfleet personnel do know what to do when their technology is taken away. This was shown on Next Generation, this was shown in the original series, and this was shown in Deep Space Nine a lot, actually. So I do like the fact that as soon as they get to the planet, pretty much immediately, Janeway takes command and starts barking out orders in a way that both makes sense and shows that she does have an understanding not only of the gravitas of the situation, but the fact that she knows what she's talking about. There's a degree of confidence in her, because she does actually have survival training, and I liked that. I liked the fact that she was being portrayed as competent, which is good because she was so incompetent in space. Clearly, we need to just ground her, put her in charge of the Makos or something, and then everything will be great. Whatever happened to the Makos, anyways? I know what happened to the Makos. Don't respond to me. And so then, so that was actually really good. I liked that. I do have to mention something that made me laugh. When there's a scene where she and Chakotay are basically saying, these are our priorities, you know, food, shelter, making sure we're good for the night. I know this is purely hindsight and a sign of the times, but my first thought was Minecraft. I'm not even kidding. I was thinking like Minecraft on a harder difficulty with, with survival mode or whatever it's called, and it's like, okay, what's your first priority? Get set up for that first night now. Work on food now. Get shelter now, because you only have until that first night, and if you don't set up properly, you're probably going to die unless you just dig into a hole, and even that's not foolproof. I'm sorry. I just wanted to share that. I'm sorry. It was the first thing I thought of. I was like, oh my god, they're playing Minecraft. I'm a geek. What do you want from me? Now, I got 2 more notes here. Then we're going to talk about one of the things that is both effective and non-effective in this episode is the length of the end of it. There's no dialogue past the part of which I just mentioned. Everyone split into teams, find this, go. No dialogue from that point till the end. They show the crew dispersing. They show the land eel. They show the denizens of the planet. I'll be talking more about those next time. They show the Voyager taking off after a while. It took them a bit. They show Suitor. Now, so far up to this point, all I'm doing is like, God, this episode's got forever to go. You know, it was just kind of dull. I'll talk about one of the other reasons why in a moment. But then it cuts to Suitor, and we find out that Suitor survived, which is not only not a surprise, but is actually really awesome because, A, Suitor, as an experienced and probably one of the best Maquis, personal commando-style fighters, it makes a lot of sense to me that Suitor would survive, and he's probably one of the best positioned people to survive on the enemy ship in guerrilla circumstances. I liked that a lot. It was an excellent use of the character. And so that got me going. That's like if my interest level is like, they're on the ship. Okay, they have to do survival stuff. Okay, now they're dispersing. Now they're... Okay, whatever. Oh, Suitor's back. Suitor's back. Oh, the Doctor's back. It... And then it just kind of keeps going for a little bit until finally it's like, to be continued, finally. It went on a little bit too long, but I feel like it could have been salvaged if it had different music. I don't remember if I've really talked about Voyager's music before. The mere fact that I don't talk about it more is pretty much all I need to say about it. If I were to do a synopsis, that would be it. A opposite of a rumination, if you will. A shortination, maybe? I'll have to think about that. But no, seriously, the music is completely uninspired elevator crap, for the most part. No offense to the composers, but it is incredibly generic. It was probably the worst in Threshold, although then again there's other things that make Threshold terrible. The point is, every time the music tries to do something, it's just kind of generic. I can actually think of 2 instances of the generic, modern era of Trek music that actually worked, and both of them were on Deep Space Nine. This is a good example of why that's really a bad thing, though. Music is a very important and powerful tool to be utilized in any kind of medium that includes audio. I've talked before, for those of you who have watched it, about the concept of a no music counter. It's the for those of you who haven't, it's the idea of a scene in a game where there is no music and there should be, and that's the important part. Because if you're doing no music, if you're making no music in a scene, it should be deliberate and with intent and purpose to emphasize the moment. Silence should be used as much of a tool as the music is. You understand? And you can do a mixture of both. Have it be nothing, and then have something happen and have the music cue up, or have the music slowly fade away as the realization of the situation comes in, that kind of thing. You can do this. It's possible. I'm just saying. The point is, the music that's playing during this whole long 7 trillion minute suspense, oh my god, we're all doomed, lead up to the to be continued thing, was dull. And it just made the scene drag on more than it should have. Because ultimately, what I did in order to test this theory, I put on some of my own music, muted the thing, and just watched the scene again. It was way better. Just that one little change. And all of a sudden I was just like, it really got me then. Which is something that it needs to be stated, because a lot of people overlook sound design in general, in everything. Even though sound design is incredibly, hugely important in, again, any audio media whatsoever, whether it be television or movie or audiobooks or video games, doesn't matter. And so the misuse of the music in those scenes was to its great detriment, and in fact is a detriment to a lot of Voyager as a whole. I actually find myself wondering if I can't think of his name. The wonderful guy who did the music for seasons 1, 2, and 3, and of course Best of Both Worlds of Next Generation. I can't think of his name. If he had done the music for Voyager, I find myself wondering if that one change would have enhanced the enjoyment of that show by itself. But I have one more thing to talk about here. Is it Joe Menosky? No, that's the writer. You know what? I'm sorry. Normally I don't do this, but this is bugging the crap out of me. For those of you who are wondering, yes, I usually record with my monitor off. It'll be obvious in a moment because I just turned my monitor on. There it is. I'm really curious about this. Usually I would cut this out, but screw you guys. We're doing it right now. We're doing it live, I believe is the way that goes. Alright, so who did your music? Ron Jones. That's the man. Ron Jones is awesome. He is actually a wonderful, incredibly versatile and skilled composer. He is one of the reasons that a lot of season 1 of TNG was enjoyable as it was. I'll be talking about that, of course, when we get to TNG. But imagine if Ron Jones had done the music. Seriously, picture it for a moment. Picture the music from, I don't know, The Neutral Zone. Now I know what you're thinking. Oh, that was a terrible episode. Remove the episode. Take that music, put it over here, put it in Voyager, put it in this episode, put it in Basics. Tell me you couldn't tell the difference immediately. Conversely, put Voyager's music in season 1 of TNG. Yeah. Now, I want to talk about one last thing, and I apologize because it's something that Voyager and Star Trek commentators have always talked about, but I've never let that stop me before. The Kazon are pathetic. I've kind of emphasized this a few times. Yeah, I don't have anything else to add to that at this point, except one little thing. When I was watching Basics... Okay, let me rewind a little bit, because I actually got to talk about this. I have a thing, okay? I understand... I have a mental viewpoint, let's put it that way, of an understanding of the general level of competence of a given whatever I'm watching, right? This applies a lot to Star Trek, but this is true across the board. So if I'm seeing, the crew of the Enterprise D, I understand what that Galaxy-class ship is capable of. Probably better than some of the writers do. I'm a geek. What do you want from me? I understand the capabilities of the ship. I understand the capabilities of the crew. I understand kind of the ways you can apply that technology dynamically. So it all comes across to give this kind of general concept, again, for their level of competency. And what that means is a lot of times in Star Trek, and this was really true in The Next Generation in several cases, they would encounter an alien force or an alien enemy or whatever, and I would never for 1 second think that they were in danger. Arsenal of Freedom is actually a really good example of this, to name a very specific episode. That episode engenders almost no sense of danger within me, because I look at that and I think, yeah, right. No, they're going to crush that thing like a bug. Sorry. And even when I rewatch it, knowing what the writers were going for, no sense of danger, no tension, nothing. There's several instances like that. Rascals is probably actually the most horrifying example of that. I mean, come on, 3 Bird of Preys run by Ferengi? But in all of Voyager, I never for 1 second took the Kazon as a threat that could be taken seriously. I remember watching Basics Part 1 back when it came out. I was watching it with Mom. Well, not with Mom. I was watching it at the same time with Mom. As Mom. And we're watching it, and this whole time I'm just waiting for them to either reveal the real hook or figure out their big plan at it. And they spend so long. The battle is actually over with like 15 minutes to spare in the episode. There's actually quite a bit of I wouldn't call it coda, I guess lead into part 2 in that. And so I'm watching that, I'm like, okay, and I'm just waiting for, the switch. I'm waiting for the other shoe to drop. And it gets to the point where they're on the planet, and they start and then it gets to the point where they start talking about their survival thing. And then it gets to the point where the Voyager craft take off. At this point, we're like 50 seconds, maybe 2 minutes away from the end of the episode. And I'm staring at it like, because I'm confused. Because the Kazon have defeated the Voyager crew, and that just doesn't make sense. And please understand, I'm not trying to say this derogatorily, even though that's probably how it's coming across. The point was, the Kazon were actually a serious threat. And this was the first time that they ever felt like they were actually threatening to the Voyager crew in the first 2 seasons. Take that for what it's worth. I know some people who say this is one of the reasons Seska was such an appropriate villain, is she took someone as pathetic as the Kazon and managed to defeat the Voyager crew with it. I know some people who take a slightly more cynical take on it, that the only way the creators of Voyager could determine a threat for the Voyager crew was to cheat, basically. It's actually kind of hard to argue with that when you look at the facts. I mentioned the bad performance earlier. But no matter how you look at it, it's interesting to look at the situation and say, wow, the Kazon are actually a threat. And that's why I have something to share about this fact, because did you know it wasn't originally the Kazon? Keeping that in mind, a lot of this episode probably makes a little bit more sense. Now, obviously, the Kazon were added in pretty early on in the script's drafts because the whole Seska thing and the child thing were very integral to the storyline. But when you look at the skeleton structure of the episode, ships attacked, ships taken over, crew abandoned, Tom Paris and Suter, this is actually singled out really early on, are left, and the Doctor, excuse me, are left behind to help take the ship back while the crew tries to survive on the planet. All of that skeleton structure makes a lot more sense, really, when you implant another alien species in other than the Kazon. But I will give credit where credit is due, because the usage of Seska was actually really effective, at least in this episode. We'll talk more about her in the next episode. And the usage of a recurring villain and a lot of continuity is something I always have to give at least some degree of props to. It is also worth noting that with the exception of mentions or holograms or time-displaced realities, this is the last we will see of the Kazon, is in basics. We will never see them again, and thank God. Regardless, we have reached the end of Season 2. I wanted to push these out. This may or may not become my new schedule. It depends on if my health continues to destroy me. I'm not even that well shaven right now because I'm actually kind of recording this on a bit of a time budget because of how sick I've been lately, so I haven't really been able to record my videos as far in advance as I prefer, so I apologize for that. Nevertheless, there will be another video coming out just about Season 2, just like I did about Season 1 soon, and I hope to see you there.